20 years ago, Manolo Saez, aka Fat Balbas, achieved his long-held wet dream since becoming Once manager in 1989, for he managed to get the UCI to create a closed league of teams called the UCI Pro Tour. It was a monstrosity that the corrupt UCI president and close friend of Lance Armstrong, Hein Verbruggen, created on the insistence of Fat Balbas. That UCI Pro Tour even had a ridiculous jersey for the #1 rider in its classification. It had laughable competitions, like the Eindhoven Time Trial, that served to give dope teams like the Gerolsteiner of Dr. Mark Schmidt or Team CSC of friend of the channel and dirty doper Bjarne Riis rich UCI points that, in turn, served to get them more money for drugs. Saez couldn't enjoy his closed cycling league because of his involvement in Operation Puerto, but nowadays, new team bosses like Richard Plugge of the Visma team, the little dictator Jonas Vingegaard, and the multi-tool Wout van Aert, or the doper Michael Hessman, well, they want to imitate him and get a rich share of the cake, because, according to them, laugh amongst yourselves, it's to defend the interests of cycling, yes! Interests that happen to be coinciding with their own, because, like Saez 20 years ago, the Dutch journalist is now the president of the International Team Association, and therefore has the necessary power to try to make these dirty ideas come to fruition. Plugge is therefore the visible head of One Cycling, a new cycling project that aims to close even further the closed league that is the UCI World Tour, and that would have the support of some teams of the highest category of cycling, as well as the current president of the UCI, the Felon David Lapation. Plugge's ideas for the new Cycling Super League are even more ridiculous than those put forward by Florentino Perez and Joan Laporta for the European Football Super League. The Dutch director of doped-up cyclists is obsessed with turning the Visma team into a super team recognizable around the globe, like Michael Jordan's Chicago Bulls or Leo Messi's Barcelona, even though his resident alien, Vingegaard, doesn't have half the charisma or aura of the two doped-up, much-admired sports stars he wants to be compared to. Of course, he's not doing it for the love of Jonas or the recognition of the cyclist's efforts. He's doing it purely for the money. Ever since Plugge became CEO of the doping team Rabobank, he has wanted to turn the Dutch team into an ocean-going liner. He signed the best cyclists on the planet, some of them still under contract, in the dirtiest possible way, and then he hired the best possible ketone treatments. He made deals with Amazon to get Jeff Bezos to pay leftover money into Richard's needy bank account. He bought off journalists from around the world to make his team appear more charismatic, calling them the Bees, and even tried to lure world champion Remco Evenepoel in an absurd merger with the Soudal outfit, like rats do in the greatest moments of a ship's downfall. None of this has helped the insatiable Plugge, who proposes a series of absurd measures to change cycling and make it even more closed off and ridiculous. As if it wasn't enough to swallow the current whiners who train in the snow, but when a little hail falls in competition, they're afraid and they order the competition to stop. But if you're not afraid of the dirty football fans who believe that their idols are not doped and are instead beings of light, you should subscribe to our doping and football channel, Failed Sharks. Click on the link in the description. Now, the star measure proposed by the CEO of the Visma team is the reduction of the calendar for the big stars of cycling. In short, he would like to see Vingegaard taking on Pogacar again and again in every Grand Tour on the calendar, like some kind of Formula One Grand Prix. Now, on the one hand, it makes sense. Most of the competitions that fans, increasingly younger and more fanatical about easy-to-digest content in this McDonaldization of society, well, they follow the races featuring show-stopping stars like Van der Poel or Evenepoel or Superman Lopez, not the ones in which brown athletes like Louis Tarzan Meintjes or Emmanuel Buchmann or the always angry Enric Mas compete. So far, we agree with Plugge. It would be fun to see the best always competing in the best competitions. But the problem is how One Cycling approaches the season for the rest of the year. For them, the Grand Tours, the Giro, the Tour and the Vuelta should last 15 days, as if they don't already last that long with the starts in foreign countries and the final days that serve no purpose and the days when the peloton doesn't compete until the final 10 kilometers of the stage. So ridiculous were the words of the dinosaur Eusebio Unzue, director of Movistar team and defender of Plugge's One Cycling project, for he has been begging for sponsors in recent years to be able to bring in better athletes and return to being the powerful team they were in the late 80s and early 90s. In an interview at the Tour of Colombia 2024, Unzue revealed that one of the measures of the One Cycling project that most appeals to him is to be able to replace a rider if he crashes in the middle of a Grand Tour stage, regardless of whether it is the first stage, which makes sense, or the one before the more intense mountain stages, which would be a disadvantage for other teams. Like a good, poor World Tour team, Unzue also wants to reduce the number of riders per team in the squad and on the payroll, a measure that would further close the One Cycling Super League, meaning fewer men racing and fewer people making a living from cycling at the highest level. Because the reality is this: what Plugge, Unzue and other members of the One Cycling clique are looking for is funding for their project, and for that they want money from the dirty Arab petrodollar to which they have tried to sell the idea of the project. And as if it was not enough with the inclusion of teams like Bahrain Victorious of Marc Padin and Sonny Colbrelli, or the UAE Team Emirates of Machin and Gianetti, the money from the Middle East would come to One Cycling to make the teams richer that are positioned in favour of this reduction of cycling events and reduction of cycling men in competition. And this way they would increase further the economic difference and the provision of medical materials when compared to the continental teams. But fortunately, One Cycling is not for everyone. There is a man who has seen doping all his life, right in front of his eyes, but he will never be a sellout and a softie like Unzue. We're talking about the alpha male of Soudal Quickstep, a man who will not allow mediocre riders like Sam Bennett or Mark Cavendish to go all grey-bearded in his ranks, and even less will he do it with the likes of Plugge, who tried to buy his team in a dirty and dastardly way. In his classic column that takes potshots at anyone who moves, Lefebvre responded to One Cycling by insisting that Grand Tours should be 21 days, and that if a team suffers losses, as has always happened, they'll just have to go to Plan B. I mean, didn't Rabobank continue to compete after having expelled Chicken Rasmussen in the 2007 Tour de France? Lefebvre, an old dog, does not trust these fictitious injuries either. He knows perfectly well that impartial and French doctors will be in charge of determining who and who cannot compete, and therefore be substituted via the absurd rules of One Cycling, seeing cases like the recent COVID of his cyclist Remco Evenepoel in the Giro 2023. According to the Belgian wine lover, cycling will not change as long as he is involved in the World Tour. And for that, we can only congratulate him and celebrate a little. Because David Lepatillon is already convinced that with some Arab money and a few false promises, he can turn cycling into the new Super Bowl or Champions League. Because Richard Plugge will do anything to get even more money once he is in the business. Because Eusebio Unzue needs financing to have an ideal pension plan for Abartha Sports. But fortunately so far, the Arabs have not taken the bait. Let's hope that the Chinese refuse also, and the gringos, or whoever they want to try to convince to put up the money. Let us hope that history does not repeat itself 20 years on, because we have already seen what the monstrosity of Fat Balbas has led to. Let's hope, in short, that they don't turn cycling into a circus led by Gerard Piquet.